I never told my son-in-law that the bank foreclosing on his parents' mansion actually belongs to my holding company. To him, I was just Harrison the broke mechanic driving a rusted Ford F-150. He invited me to dinner to humiliate me to show me my place among the elite. But he did not know that the VIP guest he was waiting for was actually my subordinate. By the time dessert was served, I owned his house, his debt, and his future. Before I tell you how I destroyed their ego, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you think family respect should be earned, not bought. The gravel crunched loudly under the tires of my 2005 Ford F-150 as I turned into the driveway of the sprawling estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. The truck was a beast of burden, much like myself. It had 300,000 miles on the odometer, and the muffler had developed a cough that sounded like a gunshot every time I took my foot off the gas pedal. In any other neighborhood, this truck would be seen as a reliable tool of the trade. Here among the manicured hedges and marble fountains, it looked like a stain on a silk dress. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was lined with 70 years of sun and hard labor. I wore my favorite Carhartt jacket, the canvas faded to a pale beige at the elbows, and a simple plaid shirt buttoned to the collar. I did not look like the founder of Bennett Logistics. I did not look like a man who signed checks that could buy this entire neighborhood. I looked exactly like what my daughter Lily had asked me to be, a simple retired man living on a pension. As I shifted the truck into park, the engine gave one last violent shudder and died. Silence returned to the driveway, but it was broken almost immediately by a voice that dripped with annoyance. "Hey you, move that pile of scrap metal." I looked out the window. A man in his 60s was striding toward me. He was wearing a navy blue suit that shimmered a little too much under the porch lights. His shoes were patent leather, and his face was an unnatural shade of orange that spoke of too many hours in a tanning bed. This was Preston Sterling, the father of my son-in-law Brandon. I opened the heavy door of my truck and stepped out. My work boots hit the pavement with a heavy thud. Before I could even open my mouth to introduce myself, Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out a key fob. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it at me. "Here, take the Porsche to the overflow lot around the back, and be careful. That car costs more than your entire life earnings." The keys sailed through the air. I did not raise my hand to catch them. I simply stood there, my hands deep in my jacket pockets, watching as the shiny fob hit the center of my chest and fell into the dirt with a pathetic clinking sound. Preston stopped. His jaw dropped slightly, his eyes widening in disbelief. He looked from the keys in the dirt to my face, his expression shifting from arrogance to pure anger. "Are you deaf or just stupid? I said move your truck and park my car. We have a VIP guest arriving in 10 minutes, and I do not want this eyesore blocking the entrance." I looked down at the keys near my boots, then back up at him. I kept my voice calm, the same level tone I used when negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts with union leaders. "I am not the valet." Preston blinked. He took a step closer, squinting at me as if trying to decipher a foreign language. "Then who the hell are you?" "The gardener. Did you come to fix the sprinklers? Use the service entrance on the side." I took a deep breath. I could smell the cheap cologne radiating off him, a scent trying too hard to mask the smell of desperation. I knew his type. I had fired dozens of men like him over the years, men who spent more time polishing their image than doing the work. "I am Harrison Bennett," I said quietly. "I am Lily's father." The silence that followed was heavy. Preston did not look embarrassed. He did not apologize. Instead, a slow, sneering smile spread across his face. He looked me up and down, taking in the frayed cuffs of my jacket and the oil stains on my boots. He let out a short, barking laugh. "Oh, I see. You are the mechanic." He said the word mechanic like it was a disease. He turned his head toward the house and shouted, "Brandon, your father-in-law is here." He parked his junk heap right in front of the fountain. He turned back to me, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. My son told me you were a simple man, Harrison. I just did not realize you were this destitute. Look at this truck. It is leaking oil on my cobblestones. Do you have any idea how much it costs to clean imported stone? I looked at the ground. There was indeed a small drop of oil, but I also looked at the cobblestones. My experience in logistics included building warehouses and paving miles of industrial lots. I knew stone. These were not imported. They were stamped concrete made to look like stone. Cheap. Just like the man standing in front of me. I decided not to point that out. Not yet. I am just here to see my daughter, I said. Preston waved his hand dismissively. Yes, yes. Just move the truck. Park it on the street outside the gate. I cannot have Mr. Jameson seeing this wreckage when he arrives. He is a man of significant importance. A captain of industry. Not exactly company you are used to keeping, I assume. Jameson. The name almost made me smile. Jameson was my chief operating officer. He was coming here on my orders to collect a debt, but Preston clearly thought he was coming to invest in some fantasy business venture. I was about to climb back into my truck to move it simply to avoid a scene when the front door of the mansion flew open. Dad. It was Lily. My little girl. She was wearing a dress that looked new and expensive, and her hair was done up in a complex twist. She looked beautiful, but her face was pale. She hurried down the steps, her high heels clicking rapidly on the concrete. For a second, I thought she was running to hug me. I braced myself ready to catch her just like I did when she was 5 years old and scraped her knee. But she stopped 3 feet away. Her eyes darted to the neighbor's house, then to the street, then back to my truck. She did not look happy. She looked terrified. Dad, what are you doing? She hissed, her voice a harsh whisper. Why did you bring the truck? I looked at her confused. It is my vehicle, Lily. It is how I get around. She grabbed my arm not affectionately, but with a frantic grip. She pulled me slightly to the side away from Preston, who was watching us with amusement. I told you to rent a sedan, or take an Uber. Look at this thing, Dad. It is embarrassing. Brandon's parents are watching. The neighbors are watching. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was the girl I had worked 18-hour days for. This was the girl whose college tuition I paid for in full, so she would never have to take a student loan. I remembered the nights I came home smelling of diesel and grease, too tired to eat, but happy because I knew I was building a future for her. I thought you wanted me to come to dinner. I said, my voice sounding older than I felt. I did. She said, desperate tears forming in her eyes. But I asked you to try. Just for one night. Could you not just pretend to be normal? Normal. To Lily, normal meant debt. It meant leasing cars you could not afford and wearing clothes you could not wash. To me, normal was honesty. Normal was owning what you had and not pretending to be something you were not. Preston cleared his throat loudly behind us. Tick-tock, people. The VIP is 10 minutes away. Move the truck or I will have it towed. Lily looked at me pleadingly. Please, Dad, just move it. Park it down the block. And please, when we get inside, do not talk about the trucking business. Do not talk about fixing engines. Just say you are retired and living on Social Security. Please. Do it for me. I looked into her eyes. I searched for the daughter who used to sit in the cab of my truck and pretend to drive. I searched for the girl who used to tell me I was her hero. I could not find her. In front of me was a woman consumed by the need to impress people who did not care about her. Okay, Lily, I said softly. I will move the truck. Thank you. She breathed out relief washing over her face. She finally leaned in and gave me a quick, stiff hug, taking care not to let her dress touch my jacket. I climbed back into the driver's seat of my Ford. The engine roared to life with a loud bang that made Preston jump. I saw him sneer and dust off his suit jacket as if the noise itself had made him dirty. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the mansion again. It was big. It was flashy. But I knew something they did not. I knew the foundation was cracking, literally and financially. I drove the truck down the street and parked it under the shade of a large oak tree, away from the prying eyes of the Sterlings and their imaginary VIP guests. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment in the silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight. They wanted a poor, naive old man. They wanted a father who was a charity case. They wanted someone they could look down on to make themselves feel tall. I reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small black phone. It was not the cheap flip phone I carried in my pocket for show. This was a satellite-encrypted device. I checked the screen. One new message from Jameson. "Boss, the paperwork is ready. We own the debt. I will be there in 20 minutes. I put the phone back and stepped out of the truck. The cool evening air hit my face. I smoothed down my Carhartt jacket. "All right, Lily," I whispered to the empty street. "You want me to play the part of the poor fool. I will play it, but you are going to hate the ending of this play." I began the long walk back to the gate, my heavy boots echoing on the pavement, marching toward a dinner that would cost them everything they had. Lily did not lead me through the front door. Instead, she took a sharp left, grabbing the rough fabric of my sleeve and pulling me toward the shadows of the detached three-car garage. The sun had fully set now, and the security lights hummed overhead, casting long, clinical shadows against the white stucco walls. I stumbled slightly as she yanked me out of the view of the main house. I thought for a moment she wanted to talk privately, to ask how I was really doing. It had been 6 months since I last saw her. I wanted to tell her about the expansion of the Western distribution hub, or how I had finally decided to step down from the daily operations of the company. I wanted to tell her that I missed her mother, and that the big house felt empty, without the noise of family. But when she finally let go of my arm, she did not look at my face. She looked at my boots. "Stand still, Dad," she commanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of anxiety and irritation. She reached out and began brushing invisible dust off the shoulder of my jacket. Her hands were frantic. She picked at a loose thread on my collar. She smoothed down the front of my plaid shirt, as if she could somehow iron out the working-class reality of my appearance with her manicured fingernails. "Lily," I said softly, trying to catch her eye. "I am fine. The clothes are clean. I washed them this morning." She finally looked up, and what I saw in her eyes broke my heart more than any business failure ever could. It was shame. Pure, unadulterated shame. "It is not about being clean, Dad," she hissed, keeping her voice low so the guests inside would not hear. "It is about fitting in. You know how Brandon parents are. They are particular. They value presentation." I looked at her. My little girl. I remembered the day she was born. I was driving a delivery route in Ohio when I got the call. I drove 10 hours straight back to the hospital. I walked in smelling of diesel and sweat, and when I held her, she did not care about presentation. She just held my finger. Now she was afraid to touch me. "What do you want me to do, Lily?" I asked. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No, you cannot leave. That would be rude. But please, just listen to me. Tonight is important. Brandon is trying to close a deal with his father. They are talking about millions of dollars, Dad." Millions. I suppressed a scoff. I knew exactly how much money Preston Sterling had because I had read his credit report 20 minutes ago. The man was drowning in debt. But Lily did not know that. She was blinded by the illusion of wealth. "So what is the plan?" I asked, my voice flat. She took a deep breath, wringing her hands together. Please just do not talk about the trucks. Do not tell stories about the diners you eat at or the tires you change. If they ask you about your career, just keep it vague." "Vague," I repeated. "Yes." She said, her eyes pleading. "Actually, maybe it is better if you just say you are retired. Tell them you live on a small, fixed income. Tell them you are on government assistance, Social Security. Maybe even say you need a little help with medical bills." I felt a coldness spread through my chest. It was a physical sensation, like ice water being poured into my veins. "You want me to tell them I am a beggar?" I asked slowly. "I want you to lower their expectations." She said, desperate now. "If they think you have nothing, they will not judge you for looking like this. They will just pity you. And pity is better than judgment, Dad. Please, just swallow your pride for 3 hours. Do it for me." I looked down at my hands. They were large hands, calloused and scarred from years of manual labor before I moved to the boardroom. These hands had repaired engines in freezing rain. These hands had gripped steering wheels for 20 hours straight to make a delivery deadline. And these hands had written the check for her college tuition. I remembered that day vividly. She had been accepted to a prestigious private university on the East Coast. The tuition was $50,000 a semester. I sat at the kitchen table with my checkbook. My wife was worried about the cost, but I told her not to worry. I wrote that check with pride. I wrote check after check for 4 years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars so she could have a degree, so she could walk in worlds I was never invited to. I never told her how hard I worked to cover those checks. I never told her about the contracts I fought for, or the competitors I crushed to ensure her future. I let her think it was easy. I let her think money just appeared. And now, because I had shielded her from the struggle, she was ashamed of the source. She wanted me to play the role of a failure because she could not accept that her father was a success on his own terms. "Okay, Lily," I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. "I will do it. I will be the poor old man on Social Security." She let out a breath she had been holding, and her shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, Dad," she said. "You have no idea how much this means to me. Brandon is under so much pressure. We just need tonight to go smoothly." She reached out to hug me again, but stopped herself. Instead, she patted my arm awkwardly. "Just try not to eat too fast," she added. "And use the napkin. Victoria hates it when people wipe their mouths with their hands." Before I could respond, the side door of the garage opened. Light spilled out onto the driveway, illuminating us like deer in headlights. Brandon stepped out. My son-in-law looked every bit the part of a man trying to convince the world he was important. He was wearing a suit that was cut too slim for his frame and a watch that was too big for his wrist. I recognized the watch immediately. It was a knockoff of a Rolex Submariner. I knew because I owned 3 real ones. His had the wrong bezel thickness. He saw us standing there and checked his phone with an exaggerated sigh. "Jesus, Lily," he said, his voice dripping with impatience. "What are you doing out here? My mother is asking for the hors d'oeuvres, and the VIP guest is going to be here any minute." "I was just helping Dad," Lily said quickly, stepping away from me as if I were contagious. He got lost finding the door. Brandon turned his eyes to me. There was no warmth in them, no respect. He looked at me the way one looks at a stain on a carpet that refuses to come out. "Well, hurry up," he snapped. "And Dad, do me a favor. Try to stand downwind of the guests. You smell like a gas station." I did not smell like gas. I smelled like expensive sandalwood soap and the crisp mountain air of my estate in Montana. But Brandon only smelled what he wanted to smell. He smelled his own prejudice. He reached up and adjusted his tie. It was a bright red silk tie with a Gucci pattern. I could tell from 5 feet away that the stitching was uneven. Nice tie, Brandon, I said, keeping my face neutral. He puffed out his chest slightly. Thanks. It is imported. Cost a fortune. But you wouldn't know anything about that, would you? He laughed, a short, cruel sound. Come on, inside. And try not to touch the walls. We just had them painted. He turned on his heel and walked back toward the house, not waiting to see if we followed. Lily gave me one last pleading look before hurrying after him. I stood there for a moment alone in the dark driveway. I reached into my pocket and touched the cold metal of my phone. Imported. I whispered to myself. I knew exactly where that tie came from. It came from a shipping container in one of my warehouses in Newark, seized by customs last month for trademark infringement. It was garbage. Just like the man wearing it. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. I was about to walk into a lion's den, armed only with my wits and a secret that could level this entire house. They wanted a show. They wanted a poor, helpless old man to kick around. I adjusted my collar and began to walk toward the light. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. And then I would bring down the curtain. The transition from the cool night air into the foyer of the Sterling estate was like stepping into a museum dedicated to bad taste. The air inside was thick with the smell of synthetic lavender air freshener, masking the faint underlying odor of damp drywall. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, but they were hung too low, creating a claustrophobic feeling rather than one of grandeur. I wiped my boots on the welcome mat carefully, even though they were already clean, but I knew it would not matter. In this house, I was the dirt. We moved toward the dining room. The space was cavernous, painted in a shade of gold that was meant to look royal, but ended up looking like mustard under the harsh, recessed lighting. A long table dominated the room, set for 6 people. The centerpiece was a massive floral arrangement that looked plastic even from the doorway. And then I saw her. Victoria Sterling. She was standing at the head of the table, adjusting a napkin with the precision of a surgeon. She was a woman who was fighting a losing battle against age with the help of aggressive plastic surgery and layers of makeup that cracked when she smiled. She wore a dress that shimmered with sequins and enough jewelry to sink a small boat. When she saw us enter, her eyes bypassed her son and her daughter-in-law completely. They landed directly on my feet. Her smile vanished. Her lips thinned into a straight line of pure disgust. She did not say hello. She did not welcome me to her home. She simply pointed a manicured finger at my boots. Oh my God! Look at the floor! She let out a gasp that was theatrical enough to win an award. She rushed forward, stopping 5 feet away, as if afraid that the poverty radiating off me might stain her dress. Brandon, I told you to make him take those things off. We have Italian marble in here. Do you know how porous marble is? If he tracks oil or mud in here, it will never come out. I looked down at the floor. It was not Italian marble. It was high-gloss ceramic tile printed with a marble pattern. I had transported tons of this material for budget hotel renovations. It was durable, cheap, and about as porous as a plastic cup. But I said nothing. I just stood there, letting her perform her outrage. Mom, he wiped his feet. Lily said, her voice small and trembling. It is fine. It is not fine. Victoria snapped, her eyes blazing. She turned her head toward the kitchen door and screamed. Maria! Maria, get in here right now! A small, nervous woman in a maid uniform hurried out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked tired. I recognized the look of an employee who was overworked and underpaid. Yes, Mrs. Sterling, Maria said, keeping her head bowed. Victoria pointed at the chair in the far corner of the table, the one furthest from the head, where Preston would sit. Get the newspapers. The ones from the recycling bin. I want you to cover that chair. Every inch of it. The seat. The backrest. Everything. Maria looked confused for a second, glancing from Victoria to me and back again. She saw a guest standing there, an older man, and the hesitation on her face showed she had a conscience. "The newspapers, Mom. For the chair." "Yes, for the chair," Victoria hissed. "Do you think I am going to let him sit on my imported leather with those work clothes? That is custom furniture, Maria. It is handcrafted in Milan. I will not have it ruined by grease and grime." I felt my blood pressure rise, but I kept my face impassive. I looked at the chair she was protecting so fiercely. It was a high-backed dining chair with dark wood legs and a creamy beige upholstery. It certainly looked expensive to the untrained eye. As Maria scurried away to fetch the trash, I walked slowly toward the chair. I reached out and ran my hand along the backrest. To the casual observer, it felt smooth and supple, but my fingers told a different story. I had spent 40 years in logistics. I had shipped everything from raw steel to delicate electronics. I knew materials. Real Italian leather has a distinctive grain, a warmth that responds to human touch. It breathes. It has imperfections that prove its authenticity. This material was cold. It was lifeless. It was perfectly uniform because it was synthetic. I pressed my thumb into the cushion. It did not wrinkle like skin. It bounced back with a rubbery resistance. This was bonded leather. A slurry of leather scraps and polyurethane sprayed over a fabric backing. And the frame underneath was not solid oak or mahogany. I could tell by the weight and the hollow sound it made when my boot grazed the leg. It was compressed wood pulp. I knew this chair intimately. In fact, I knew exactly where it came from. My company, Bennett Logistics, had secured a massive contract last year to handle the shipping for a discount furniture manufacturer based in Shenzhen. We had moved 50,000 units of this exact model to a chain of budget home stores across the Midwest. The wholesale price on the manifest was $48.50 per unit. Victoria probably paid $500 for it, believing the lie on the price tag, just like she believed the lie of her own importance. She was protecting a $50 fake with the ferocity of a museum curator protecting a Picasso. Maria returned with a stack of old newspapers. Her hands were shaking slightly as she approached me. She whispered a quiet apology that only I could hear as she began to lay the papers over the beige upholstery. She covered the seat. She draped the sports section over the back. She even put a coupon circular on the floor under the table for my feet. It was a spectacle of humiliation. I stood there and watched as my seat was prepared like a crate for a dirty dog. Lily had turned away, pretending to admire a painting on the wall, to hide her tears. Brandon was checking his reflection in the china cabinet, ignoring the scene entirely. "There," Victoria said, clapping her hands together as if she had just solved a global crisis. "That should protect the investment." "You can sit now, Mr. Harrison." She gestured to the newspaper-covered chair with a benevolent smile, as if she were doing me a favor. I stepped forward. The newspapers crinkled loudly as I sat down. The sound was sharp and jarring in the quiet room. Crunch, crinkle, snap. Every movement I made created a cacophony of noise, drawing attention to my presence, drawing attention to my status as the outsider. I settled into the chair. The fake leather beneath the paper felt hard and unforgiving. I rested my arms on the table, being careful not to let my sleeves touch the tablecloth. Victoria took her seat at the opposite end of the table. She smoothed her dress and looked at me with a tilt of her head, a look of faux sympathy plastered across her face. "You must forgive me for being so particular," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We just value quality in this house. We work very hard to surround ourselves with the finer things." She paused, waiting for me to acknowledge her superiority. When I just stared back at her, she continued, her smile widening into a smirk. "Besides, I am sure you are more comfortable this way. I imagine you are not used to sitting on such delicate furniture. Someone in your line of work probably feels more at home on a plastic folding chair, or perhaps a straw mat on the floor. Am I right?" She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like metal on glass. Brandon joined in, chuckling as he poured himself a glass of water. "Yeah, Dad is not big on luxury, Mom," Brandon said. "He thinks a recliner from the thrift store is high class." I sat there on my throne of garbage, listening to the crinkle of the newsprint beneath me. I looked at the woman who thought she was a queen. I looked at the son-in-law who thought he was a prince. And I looked at the cheap factory-made chair that they worshipped as a throne. They were drowning in debt, borrowing money to buy trash that looked like treasure, while mocking the man who could buy their entire reality with the change in his pocket. "It is fine, Victoria," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I understand completely. You have to protect what you own, especially when it is so fragile." I ran my finger along the edge of the table. It was veneer, not solid wood. Just another layer of fake on top of fake. "I am very comfortable," I added. Victoria beamed, satisfied that she had put me in my place. She picked up a small silver bell and rang it. "Good. Now that we are all settled, let us have some wine. Brandon, bring out the reserve, the bottle we have been saving for the investor. Let us give Mr. Harrison a taste of what real success tastes like." As Brandon moved to the sideboard to get the wine, I shifted in my seat. The newspaper beneath me shifted, revealing a headline from the business section near my thigh. It was an article about the rising cost of bankruptcy filings in the state of Connecticut. I suppressed a smile. The irony was delicious. I was literally sitting on their future. I adjusted my napkin and prepared myself. The chair was fake. The marble was fake. The leather was fake. And soon I would find out if the wine was fake too. But the lesson I was about to teach them, that would be very real. The silence in the dining room was only broken by the sound of Preston clearing his throat, a sound that demanded attention like a gavel in a courtroom. He walked over to the mahogany sideboard, which was actually particle board, with a veneer finish, and picked up a bottle of wine that had been sitting there like a sacred relic. He held it by the neck, cradling the base with his other hand, presenting it to the room as if he were holding the Holy Grail. "Gentlemen and ladies," Preston announced, his voice booming with self-importance. "Tonight is a celebration of new beginnings, so I decided to open something truly special from my private cellar. This is a Chateau Lafite Rothschild, 1982. He paused for effect, waiting for the gasps of admiration. Brandon let out a low whistle of appreciation, shaking his head in disbelief. "No way, Dad," Brandon said, eyes wide. "Eyes. That bottle is worth like $3,000. Are you serious? We are going to drink that tonight." Preston smiled, a benevolent grin that did not reach his cold eyes. He walked around the table, holding the bottle out so everyone could see the label. It looked old. The paper was yellowed and slightly peeling at the corners, and there was a layer of dust on the glass that looked suspiciously uniform, like it had been applied with a spray can. "For the right occasion, nothing is too expensive," Preston said. "And with the deal we are about to close tonight, I think we deserve the best." He produced a corkscrew and began the ritual of opening the bottle. He made a show of cutting the foil, twisting the screw, and pulling the cork with a dramatic pop. He sniffed the cork, closing his eyes and letting out a moan of pleasure that made me want to gag. "Exquisite," he whispered. "Simply exquisite. The tannins have matured perfectly." He moved around the table, pouring the dark red liquid into the large crystal goblets. First for Victoria, who held her glass out with a trembling hand, as if receiving a sacrament. Then for Lily, who looked terrified that she might spill a drop on the tablecloth. Then he poured a generous amount for Brandon, and finally he filled his own glass. He stopped when he reached my corner of the table. He looked at my empty glass, then at the bottle, then at me. A look of mock consideration crossed his face. "Oh, Harrison, I almost forgot." He set the wine bottle down on the table with a heavy thud and reached for a glass pitcher of water that was sitting near the centerpiece. I know a man of your simple tastes might find a vintage like this a bit overwhelming. It is very complex, very dry. It is not like that sweet boxed wine or the cheap beer you are probably used to drinking after a shift at the garage. He poured water into my glass. It was lukewarm. I could see the condensation on the pitcher was gone. Besides, he continued, his voice dripping with condescension, it would be a sin to waste a $3,000 bottle on a palate that cannot distinguish between a Bordeaux and grape juice. You understand, right? We do not want to cast pearls before swine, as the saying goes. I looked at the water in my glass. Then I looked at the ruby-red liquid in Brandon's glass, sitting just inches away from my hand. I understand perfectly, Preston, I said, keeping my voice level. I would hate to be a burden on your hospitality. Preston smirked and raised his glass for a toast. To prosperity, he said, and to those who have the vision to seize it. They all clinked glasses. The sound of crystal ringing filled the room. I lifted my water glass and took a sip. It tasted of chlorine. Tap water. He had not even bothered to filter it. As they took their first sips, murmuring their exaggerated approvals, I leaned slightly toward Brandon. Can I just see the color? I asked innocently. I have never seen a $3,000 wine before. Brandon hesitated for a second, clutching his glass like a child guarding a toy, but then he shrugged. He pushed the glass slightly toward me, his expression one of pity. Sure, Dad. Take a look. Just do not touch the rim. I do not want grease on the glass. I leaned in. I did not need to touch it. I just needed to be close enough for my olfactory senses to take over. I had spent 40 years entertaining clients in the finest restaurants in New York, Paris, and Tokyo. I had shared bottles of real Rothschild with heads of state. I knew the smell of old money. I inhaled deeply. The first thing that hit me was the smell of sulfur. A sharp chemical sting that indicates cheap mass-produced wine where preservatives are pumped in to extend shelf life. Beneath the sulfur was the cloying scent of artificial oak flavoring. Real wine gets its oak notes from aging in barrels for years. Cheap wine gets it from adding sawdust chips to the steel fermentation tanks. And then there was the fruit. It did not smell like aged currants or blackberries. It smelled like jam. Sugary, overripe jam. I glanced at the bottle on the table again. From this angle, I could see the back label. The font was slightly blurry. A high-quality printer would never leave blurry edges. And the dust on the bottle was gray, not the brownish dust of a cellar. It was vacuum cleaner dust stuck on with hairspray. This was not a 1982 Rothschild. This was a $12 bottle of generic red blend, probably bought at a gas station or a bulk discount store, decanted into an old bottle and sealed with a fake cork. It was the beverage equivalent of Preston himself. Flashy on the outside, rotten on the inside. I looked up to see Preston watching me closely, waiting for me to look jealous, waiting for me to look defeated. I decided to give him what he wanted. I pulled back from the glass and shook my head, my eyes wide with feigned wonder. Wow, I whispered. Preston leaned forward, eager for the praise. What is it, Harrison? What do you smell? I smell money, I said, letting a tone of awe creep into my voice. It smells thick, like it has been waiting a long time. I have never smelled anything like that in my life. Which was technically true. I had never smelled anything that awful passed off as something that expensive. Preston leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He took another large gulp of the swill, swishing it around in his mouth and swallowing with a loud gulp. Exactly, he said, wiping his lips with a linen napkin. That is the smell of sophistication, Harrison. It is a world you can only observe from the outside. But do not feel bad. Not everyone is cut out for the finer things. Some people are meant to drive the trucks, and some people are meant to own the cargo. It is just the natural order of things. He set his glass down. and the playful mockery in his eyes suddenly vanished, replaced by a sharp, predatory glint. The theater of the wine was over. The appetizer of humiliation had been served. Now it was time for the main course. He clasped his hands together on the table and looked directly at me, ignoring Lily and Victoria. "Speaking of the natural order, Harrison, we should probably discuss why we really invited you here tonight. We are family after all, and family helps each other, especially when there is a massive opportunity on the table." I saw Brandon straighten up in his chair. This was the rehearsed part. This was the moment they had been building up to. I took another sip of my chlorine water and set the glass down carefully on the newspaper. "I am listening," I said. Preston smiled, but this time it was not a smile of vanity. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. He thought he was the shark. He did not know he was swimming with a leviathan. "Good," he said, "because what I am about to propose is going to change your daughter's life. And yours too, if you are smart enough to listen." The lights in the dining room dimmed automatically, controlled by a smart home system that probably cost more than Brandon made in a year. A portable projector screen had been set up in front of the bay window, blocking the view of the garden, and suddenly the room was bathed in a harsh blue light. Brandon stood next to the screen holding a small remote control, clicking it, with the authority of a general commanding an army. But he was not a general, he was a boy playing dress-up. A logo flashed onto the screen. It was a green leaf intertwined with a $sign. The words Green Horizon Eco Resorts appeared beneath it in a font that tried too hard to look modern. Brandon cleared his throat and began to pace back and forth, his hands moving in practiced gestures that he had likely learned from watching motivational speakers on YouTube. "The future of real estate is not in ownership," he declared, his voice rising. "It is in experiences. We are building a fully sustainable off-grid luxury retreat for the digital nomad generation. Solar power, hydroponic gardens, cryptocurrency integration for all payments. It is not just a resort, it is a revolution." I sat there in the dark, sipping my tap water and watching the slide deck. To the untrained eye, it looked impressive. There were renderings of glass pods in the forest, smiling young people holding tablets and graphs with lines that only went up. But I was not an untrained eye. I had built a logistics empire from a single truck. I knew how to read a business plan, and what I was looking at was not a business plan. It was a fantasy. I looked at the revenue model slide. It was nonsense. They projected 90% occupancy in the first month with zero marketing budget. They listed projected income based on tokenized assets that did not even exist yet. There was no line item for insurance, no line item for maintenance, no line item for regulatory compliance. It was a classic Ponzi structure wrapped in greenwashing buzzwords meant to trap investors who cared more about feeling virtuous than making a profit. Preston was nodding along vigorously, his face illuminated by the blue light of the screen. "Brilliant, son, simply brilliant," he murmured. "The synergy is undeniable." Brandon clicked to the next slide. It showed a pie chart with a large slice missing. "We have already secured 80% of the seed capital from private equity firms in Silicon Valley." Brandon lied smoothly. I knew he was lying because private equity does not invest in slide decks with typos. I had spotted 3 spelling errors already. We just need one final partner to close the round. We need someone who understands the value of land, someone who wants to leave a legacy. The room went silent. The projector hummed loudly in the quiet. Brandon turned slowly to face me. The predatory glint was back in his eyes, but he masked it with a smile that was supposed to be warm and inviting. "Dad," he said, stepping closer to the table, "we want to give you this opportunity. We know you do not have cash savings. We know things have been tight for you since you retired. But you have something else. You have equity." I put my glass down on the newspaper-covered table. I knew exactly where this was going. Equity. I repeated, playing the part of the confused old man. Yes, Brandon said, leaning in. That old cabin of yours, the one up by the lake, and the 10 acres of woods surrounding it. I felt a muscle in my jaw tighten. That cabin was not just an old building. It was where I had taken my late wife for our honeymoon 50 years ago because we could not afford a hotel. It was where I sat on the porch and watched the sunrise when the noise of the business world became too loud. And the land was even more precious. For the past 2 years, I had been quietly working with the county zoning board. I had spent thousands on environmental impact studies and architectural plans. I was not going to sell it. I was going to build the Bennett Home for Children, a sanctuary for orphans and foster kids who had nowhere else to go. The land was currently valued at $2 million because of the commercial rezoning approval I had just received last week. An approval that was sitting in a safe in my office. But to Brandon and Preston, it was just a rotting shack in the woods worth a couple of $100,000 at best. We checked the tax records, Dad. Brandon continued, oblivious to the fire burning inside me. The bank appraisal for the raw land is around $200,000. That is exactly the buy-in amount for the founder tier of our project. He clicked the remote again, showing a slide with a picture of a golden key. If you sign the deed over to us as collateral, we can get a loan against the land tomorrow. We put the money into Green Horizon, and in 3 months, when we launch the token sale, we pay off the loan and you get your deed back. Plus 5% of the company. You will be rich, Dad. You will never have to drive that old truck again. Preston chimed in, his voice oily and persuasive. It is a no-brainer, Harrison. The land is just sitting there doing nothing. It is a dead asset. Let the boys turn it into a gold mine. Think of it as your contribution to Lily future. Do you not want your daughter to be the wife of a mogul? I looked at Lily. She was staring at her plate, her hands twisting a napkin into a tight knot. She knew how much I loved that cabin. She knew I had planned to retire there before I decided to turn it into an orphanage. But she said nothing. Her silence was a betrayal louder than any scream. I looked back at Brandon. He was waiting, his hand extended as if expecting me to shake it right then and there. Let me get this straight, I said slowly, keeping my voice steady. You want me to mortgage my home, the only thing I own free and clear, and you want me to give you the money for a business that has not built a single room yet. It is not a mortgage, Dad, it is leverage. Brandon corrected me, sounding annoyed that I was not jumping for joy. And we have not built yet because we are smart. We are lean. That is how modern business works. I leaned back in the creaking chair. And what if it fails? I asked. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Brandon blinked as if I had just spoken in a different language. What? He asked. What if the project fails? I said louder this time. What if nobody buys the tokens? What if the zoning board denies your permits for the glass pods? What if the crypto market crashes? If the business fails, the bank takes my land. I lose my home. I lose everything. What is the guarantee, Brandon? Brandon let out a sharp, exasperated breath. He looked at his father, then back at me, shaking his head with a look of pure disdain. Preston laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Oh, Harrison, you really are a simpleton, aren't you? Brandon slammed the remote down on the table. The sound made Lily jump. This is exactly why you are poor, Dad. Brandon spat the words out. This is why you spent your whole life fixing other people's cars instead of owning the dealership. You are paralyzed by fear. You have a poverty mindset. He walked around the table, looming over me. Rich people do not ask what if it fails. They ask how big will it win. You are thinking about protecting a rotting piece of wood in the middle of nowhere while I am trying to build an empire. I am trying to help you. I am trying to pull you out of the mud, but you are too busy hugging the dirt to notice. He gestured to the screen where the dollar sign was still glowing. You think small, Harrison. That is your problem. You have always thought small. That is why you drive a truck. That is why you sit on newspapers. And that is why you are going to stay a loser unless you listen to people who are smarter than you. I looked up at him. I looked at his cheap suit. I looked at his desperate eyes. He was talking about being smart while trying to hustle a man who had forgotten more about business than he would ever learn. He called it a poverty mindset. I called it risk management. But I did not say that. I just looked at him with the wide, watery eyes of a scared old man. I just do not want to be homeless, Brandon. I said, my voice trembling slightly. Brandon rolled his eyes and looked at Lily. Talk to him, Lily. Explain it to him before I lose my patience. We need that deed signed tonight. The bank is expecting the paperwork first thing in the morning. He turned his back on me, walking over to pour himself another glass of the fake wine, confident that he had already won. He did not see the look on my face change. He did not see the calculation in my eyes. He wanted the deed. Fine. I would give him a piece of paper. But it would not be the paper he thought it was. And the lesson I was about to teach him would cost a lot more than $200,000. The room fell into a silence so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked out of the ventilation system. Brandon was breathing hard, his chest heaving slightly from his speech about synergy and crypto tokens. He stared at me, waiting for me to pull out a pen and sign away my life. But I just sat there. I kept my hands folded on the table, resting on the sports section of the newspaper Victoria had insisted on. My face was a mask of confusion and hesitation. I did not say no. I did not say yes. I just let the silence hang there. It is a negotiation tactic I learned 3 decades ago. When you want to see someone true colors, you just stop talking. Silence makes liars nervous. It makes them fill the void with their insecurities. And sure enough, the sterlings began to crack. Victoria was the first to speak. She did not look at me. She turned her head slowly toward Lily, her diamond earrings catching the blue light from the projector screen. She picked up her wine glass, swirling the fake vintage liquid around, before taking a delicate sip. Oh dear. She sighed, a sound that was meant to convey disappointment, but sounded more like a hiss. I am confused, Lily. I thought you told us your father was a devoted family man. I thought you said he would do anything for you. Lily flinched as if her mother-in-law had thrown the wine in her face rather than just words. She looked up from her lap, her eyes wide and fearful. He is. Lily stammered. He is a good father. He loves me. Victoria set the glass down with a sharp click against the table. Does he really? She asked, her voice dripping with poison disguised as concern. Because from where I am sitting, it looks like he cares more about a dilapidated shack in the woods than he cares about your future. We are offering you a chance to enter high society, Lily, to be secure, to be respected. And your father is standing in the way because of what? Sentimental attachment to some firewood. Preston leaned in, sensing the opening. He decided to play the role of the disappointed patriarch. It is a shame, really, he said, shaking his head. We treated you like a daughter, Lily. We welcomed you into this house even though, let us be honest, you come from a very different background. We are trying to lift you up. But maybe the apple does not fall far from the tree. Maybe you are destined to be small, just like him. I saw the color drain from Lily's face. She looked at her husband, seeking support. But Brandon just crossed his arms and looked away, pouting like a petulant child who had been denied a toy. Dad is right, Lily, Brandon muttered. If he really loved you, he would sign the paper. It is just land. It is dirt. Does he value dirt more than he values us? The manipulation was masterfully cruel. They were cornering her, forcing her to choose between the family she was born into and the family she was trying so desperately to impress. I watched my daughter crumbling under the weight of their expectations. I wanted to stand up, I wanted to flip the table and tell them exactly who I was, but I needed to know. I needed to see how deep the rot went. Lily turned to me. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to clasp them together to stop the shaking. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had spent an hour applying. "Dad," she whispered. I looked at her. I softened my expression, hoping she would see the father who used to carry her on his shoulders. "What is it, Pumpkin?" I asked, using her childhood nickname. "Please, Dad." She said, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "Just give them the deed." "I cannot, Lily," I said softly. "That is my home. It is where I live. It is where your mother and I spent our happiest years. If I sign it away and something goes wrong, I have nowhere to go." Something snapped in her eyes then. The fear turned into anger. The shame turned into resentment. She wiped her face aggressively, smearing mascara across her cheek. "You're home." She spat the word out. "Dad, look at you. You are 70 years old. You are living alone in the middle of nowhere. It is selfish." Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. "Yes, selfish." She continued, her voice rising in pitch. "You are holding on to a 3-bedroom house and 10 acres of land for one person. It is ridiculous. You cannot maintain it. The roof leaks. The heating is expensive. You are just wasting resources that could be used to build a life for me." I gripped the edge of the table. The roof did not leak. I had replaced it last year with premium slate. The heating was geothermal, but she did not know that because she had not visited me in 2 years. "So what do you suggest I do, Lily?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "If I give you the house, where do I sleep?" She took a deep breath and said the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "You go to a home, Dad. A nursing home." The room went deadly silent. Even Preston looked a little surprised by the brutality of it. I stared at her. I tried to find a trace of a joke in her eyes. I tried to find a hint that she was being coerced, but her eyes were hard. "There is a state-run facility in the next county," she said, rushing to justify herself. I looked it up. "They take people with low income. They take your social security check, and they give you a bed and meals." "It is fine, Dad. You will have people your own age to talk to. You will be safe. You will not have to worry about cooking or cleaning." I felt a cold numbness spread from my chest to my fingertips. She had looked it up. She had researched state-run poorhouses for me. While I was sitting in my office planning a multi-million-dollar trust fund for her unborn children, she was planning to put me in a state facility where the elderly were warehoused until they died. "You want me to go to a state home?" I repeated slowly. "So Brandon can build crypto glamping pods." "It is not just about the pods," she screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "It is about me, Dad. Look at this house. Look at how they live. I want this. I deserve this. And you are standing in my way because you are too stubborn to let go of the past. You had your life. Let me have mine." Brandon walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. He did not look at her with love. He looked at her like a trainer whose dog had just performed a trick correctly. "She is right, Dad," Brandon said smugly. "It is the circle of life. The old make way for the young. We can drive you to the facility tomorrow. We can even help you pack a bag. Just sign the papers tonight." I looked around the table. Victoria was smirking, polishing her nails on her napkin. Preston was pouring more of the fake wine, his eyes gleaming with greed. Brandon was looking at the deed. And Lily, my little girl, was looking at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. I realized then that the daughter I raised was gone. She had been consumed by the envy and superficiality of this family. She was not a victim anymore. She was an accomplice. The pain was excruciating. It felt like my heart was being squeezed in a vice, But alongside the pain, there was something else. Clarity. Absolute crystal clear clarity. I knew exactly what I had to do. I let out a low groan and hunched over, slightly clutching my stomach. "Dad," Lily asked reflexively, stepping forward before stopping herself. I do not feel well," I stammered, playing up the frailty they expected. "My stomach. Maybe it was the water, or the excitement." Preston looked annoyed. "Oh, for God's sake," he muttered. "Do not die on us before you sign the paperwork, Harrison." "I just need a moment," I said, breathing heavily. "I need to go to the restroom. Just give me 5 minutes to catch my breath. Then we will talk about the signature." Brandon exchanged a look with Preston. A look of victory. They thought I was breaking. They thought the physical weakness was a sign of mental capitulation. "Fine," Brandon said, waving his hand toward the hallway. "Go handle your business. But do not take too long. The bank portal closes at midnight." I pushed myself up from the creaking chair. The newspaper stuck to my pants for a second before fluttering to the floor. I did not pick it up. I walked slowly out of the dining room, dragging my feet like a defeated old man. I heard Victoria whisper loudly as I left, "Make sure he washes his hands before he touches the pen." I kept walking. I passed the fake marble columns. I passed the reproduction oil paintings. I entered the hallway and closed the bathroom door behind me. I locked it. I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at the old man in the work clothes. I saw the tears welling up in his eyes. I let them fall. I cried for 30 seconds. I cried for the little girl who used to hold my hand. I cried for the memory of the family I thought I had. Then I wiped my face with the rough paper towel. I straightened my spine. The sadness evaporated, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the satellite phone. The screen was glowing. It was time to end this charade. It was time to show them that the old mechanic they wanted to put in a poorhouse was the one holding the keys to their destruction. I dialed the number. "Jameson," I said, my voice steady and strong. "Execute the purchase and bring the eviction notice. I am done playing." I walked out of the dining room, clutching my stomach and keeping my head down. The performance of a frail old man with a weak constitution was easy to maintain, especially when the disgust I felt for the people at that table was making me physically nauseous. I heard the heavy thud of the dining room door closing behind me, muffling the sounds of their self-congratulatory chatter. Once I was in the hallway, the act dropped instantly. I straightened my back. My steps became silent and purposeful. The hallway was lined with portraits of Preston and Victoria posing in exotic locations. Paris, Dubai, the Amalfi Coast. I paused for a split second to look at the Paris photo. The lighting was wrong. The shadows on their faces did not match the direction of the sun behind the Eiffel Tower. It was a Photoshop job. A bad one. I reached the door to the guest powder room, which was the destination I had announced. But I did not go in. Instead, I looked further down the corridor to the heavy double doors made of dark walnut that led to Preston private study. The door was slightly ajar. My gut instinct, the same instinct that had saved my company from bankruptcy in the recession of 2008, screamed at me. There was something in that room. The answers to the desperation I had seen in Brandon's eyes were not in the dining room. They were in the office. I looked around. The house was quiet, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I slipped past the bathroom and pushed the office door open just enough to slide through. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and cheap cologne. It was furnished to look like the command center of a titan of industry. There was a massive desk that looked like a reproduction of the Resolute desk in the Oval Office. Behind it, shelves were lined with leather-bound books. I walked over to the shelves and pulled one book out at random. It was light, too light. I opened it. It was a hollow box. The spine was just cardboard. I put it back. Everything in this house was a prop. I moved to the desk. This was where the facade cracked. Unlike the pristine dining room, the desk was a chaotic disaster zone of paper. Piles of unopened mail were stacked like teetering towers. This was not the desk of a disorganized genius. This was the desk of a man who was afraid to open his mail. I turned on the small green banker lamp on the desk, keeping the main lights off to avoid detection. The pool of yellow light illuminated the top layer of the mess. I began to sift through the papers, my hands moving with the speed and precision of a forensic accountant. The first envelope I picked up had the logo of a luxury car leasing company. It was already opened. I pulled out the letter. Notice of default and intent to repossess. I scanned the details. The Porsche Panamera that Preston had thrown me the keys to was 4 months behind on payments. The arrears totaled $9,000. They had threatened to disable the ignition remotely if payment was not received by tomorrow. So that was why he wanted me to move the car. It wasn't about the VIP guest. He was afraid a repo man would spot it on the street. I placed the letter down and picked up another. This one was from the electric company. A final disconnect notice. They owed $3,000 in unpaid utility bills. I dug deeper into the pile, moving aside a stack of glossy brochures for the Green Horizon project. Buried underneath the fantasy was the cold, hard reality. I found a thick envelope from a law firm in New York. The header read Civil Summons. I opened it. Preston Sterling was being sued by 3 different individuals for fraud. Apparently, he had sold them shares in a gold mining operation in Nevada that did not exist. The lawsuit was seeking damages of $200,000. The number made me pause. $200,000. That was exactly the amount they were trying to extract from me. They did not want my land to build a resort. They did not want to invest in crypto. They needed my money to pay off a settlement before Preston went to jail. They were going to take my life savings, my home, and throw it into a legal furnace to save their own skins. I felt a cold rage building in my chest. It was one thing to be greedy. It was another to be a predator who fed on family. But the smoking gun was at the bottom of the drawer. It was a letter from a property management company based in Stamford. It was addressed to Preston and Victoria Sterling tenants. Tenants. I pulled the document closer to the light. It was an eviction notice. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, you are in violation of your lease agreement for the property at 12 Oakwood Drive. You are currently 6 months in arrears on your rent payments of $8,000 per month. The total outstanding balance is $48,000. I did the math in my head. $48,000, plus the car, plus the utilities, plus the lawsuit. They were not just broke. They were destitute. They were living on borrowed time in a house they did not own, driving a car. They did not own, drinking wine that was not real. I looked at the date on the eviction notice. They had been given 30 days to vacate. The 30 days expired tomorrow. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Tonight was not just a dinner. It was a Hail Mary pass. If they did not get my signature on that deed tonight, they would be on the street in 24 hours. They were cornered rats, and cornered rats bite. I took out my phone and snapped photos of the documents. The eviction notice, the lawsuit, the car repo letter. I needed evidence. I needed to make sure that when I dropped the hammer, there would be no wiggle room. No way for them to spin a story to Lily. I was just focusing the camera on the car leasing agreement when I heard a sound that made me freeze. Footsteps. They were not the clicking heels of Lily or Victoria. These were heavy steps. The steps of a man. And they were coming from the hallway leading to the kitchen, which connected to the office through a side service door. I clicked the screen of my phone off, plunging the room back into semi-darkness, save for the small pool of light from the desk lamp. I reached out and switched the lamp off. The room went pitch black. The footsteps got closer. I could hear the heavy breathing of someone who was out of shape. I told you it would work. It was Preston's voice. He was talking to someone, probably on a phone, or maybe Brandon was with him. The old man is soft. He is already feeling guilty about the daughter. We will get the signature tonight. Once we have the deed, we can flip the title to the loan shark by morning. I stood motionless, behind the heavy velvet curtains near the window. My heart was beating slow and steady. I was not afraid of being caught. I was afraid of killing him before I had the chance to ruin him legally. Yeah, I know, Preston continued. He thinks he is helping build a resort. Idiot. By the time he figures out the land is gone, we will be in Cancun. The door handle to the office jiggled. I held my breath. If he came in, he would see me, or at least sense that someone had been here. The smell of his cheap cigar smoke was now mixed with the adrenaline radiating off me. The handle turned. The door opened a crack, letting a slice of light from the hallway cut across the carpet. Honey, where is the other bottle of wine? It was Victoria calling from the dining room. Preston paused. He let go of the door handle. I am coming, he shouted back. I am just getting the cigars. He did not enter the room. He turned and walked back down the hall, his footsteps fading away. I let out a silent breath. Cancun. He thought he was going to Cancun. I stepped out from behind the curtain. I looked at the mess on the desk one last time. I slipped out of the office and back into the main hallway. I checked my watch. I had been gone 4 minutes. I walked toward the bathroom, not to hide, but to wash the invisible dirt of this house off my hands. As I looked in the mirror, I did not see a victim. I saw the executioner. I reached for my phone again. It was time to make the call that would turn their Cancun dream into a nightmare. I stood in the shadow of the doorframe, my back pressed against the cold plaster of the wall. The hallway was dark, but the light from underneath the swinging kitchen door cut a sharp yellow line across the floorboards. Inside the kitchen, the air of sophistication had completely evaporated. The polite murmurs of a dinner party were replaced by the rough, unguarded voices of 2 men who thought they had already gotten away with murder. I could hear the sound of a refrigerator door opening and the hiss of a beer can being cracked open. It was a cheap sound, the sound of victory for small men. I cannot believe he actually bought the stomach ache act, Preston said. His voice was no longer the cultured baritone he used at the table. It was high-pitched and rasping with adrenaline. He practically ran out of the room. He is probably in there right now hyperventilating about his retirement plan. I heard Brandon laugh. It was not the nervous laugh he used in front of his wife. It was a cruel, mocking sound that made my skin crawl. He is pathetic, Dad, Brandon said. Did you see his hands shaking? He is terrified of being homeless. The thought of sleeping in a shelter has him ready to sign anything. We could have asked for his truck too, and he would have given it to us just to keep a roof over his head. I tightened my grip on the doorframe. My knuckles turned white. They were celebrating my fear. They were toasting to the destruction of an old man's dignity. So what is the timeline? Brandon asked. The bank portal really does close at midnight, right? Preston scoffed. The sound of glass clinking against granite followed. Forget the bank portal, you idiot. There is no bank portal. We are not putting that land into the Green Horizon project. That project is a ghost ship. It is sinking. We need liquid cash, Brandon. We need untraceable funds. I leaned closer, my ear almost touching the wood. This was it. The pivot. As soon as the ink is dry on that deed. Preston continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We call Alvarez. He has a buyer in Queens who pays cash for distressed assets. No questions asked. We sell the land tonight. I held my breath. Alvarez. I knew that name. In the logistics world, Alvarez was known as a bottom feeder, a man who bought stolen warehouses and laundered money through real estate. If they sold to him, the land would be tied up in criminal investigations for decades. My orphanage would never be built. How much? Brandon asked. 150,000, Preston said. I almost gasped. They were planning to sell a $2 million property for less than 10% of its value. They were going to burn down a forest to roast a marshmallow. It was not just greed. It was stupidity of the highest order. 150. Brandon repeated, sounding disappointed. That is it. I thought you said it was worth 200. It is a fire sale, son. Preston snapped. We do not have time to negotiate. We take the 150. We pay the 48,000 to the landlord so we do not get evicted tomorrow. We pay off the car. And the rest. The rest is our ticket out of here. Ticket to where? Mexico, Preston said. I have a friend in Cabo. We go down there for a few months. We lay low until the lawsuits in New York blow over. We live like kings on the exchange rate. By the time anyone realizes the land is gone, we will be drinking margaritas on the beach. There was a pause. The silence of the kitchen was heavy with the weight of their scheme. What about Lily? Brandon asked. I closed my eyes. This was the question that would determine if my son-in-law had any shred of humanity left. I prayed that he would hesitate. I prayed that he would say they could not leave her behind. Preston snorted. What about her? She is a liability, Brandon. She asks too many questions. Besides, she is the one with the credit score. When the dust settles, let the creditors go after her. She is young. She can declare bankruptcy. It builds character. I waited for Brandon to defend her. I waited for him to say that was his wife, that he loved her. Instead, I heard the sound of him taking a long drink of beer. Yeah, Brandon said slowly. I guess you are right. She is kind of dead weight anyway. She has been nagging me about getting a real job for months. It is exhausting. She is stupid too, Preston added. Just like her father. She believes anything you tell her. Tell her I went to Europe for business. Tell her you are going to set up the Mexico branch of the company. She will wait here like a loyal dog while the house of cards falls on top of her. I felt a physical pain in my chest, but it was not a heart attack. It was the death of the last ounce of mercy I had for these people. They were not just thieves. They were monsters. They were willing to leave my daughter to face financial ruin and homelessness while they ran away with the proceeds of my life work. And the old man? Brandon asked. What do we do with him? If we sell the land tonight, he is going to find out eventually. He is going to come looking for us. Preston laughed again, a dismissive wave of a hand that I could hear in his tone. Let him come. What is he going to do? Fix our car to death? He has no money. He has no lawyers. And once he signs that deed, he has no home. Preston lowered his voice. Listen to me, Brandon. Tonight after he signs, we put him in a cab. We send him to that state facility Lily found. The one in Bridgeport. It is a kennel for humans. They sedate them at night so they do not make noise. You drop him off at the front door and you drive away. By the time he wakes up and realizes what happened, we will be crossing the border. Bridgeport. I knew that facility. It was under investigation for elder abuse. It was a place where people went to die alone and in pain. That was their plan for me. Sedation and abandonment. Perfect, Brandon said. The old man is finally going to be useful for something. He is going to fund our vacation. I reached into my pocket. My hand found the cool metal of the phone. I did not look at the screen. I knew the buttons by heart. I pressed the side button 3 times. The haptic feedback buzzed against my thumb. Recording saved. I had it all. The confession. The conspiracy, the intent to defraud, the admission of the fake eviction, the plan to abandon his wife. I stood there in the dark, and I felt a strange transformation taking place. The shoulders that had been hunched in feigned weakness straightened out. The face that had been contorted with the pain of a disappointed father smoothed into a mask of stone. Harrison the mechanic was gone. He had left the building. Standing in the hallway now was Harrison Bennett, the man who had crushed union strikes in the 80s, the man who had negotiated hostile takeovers of rival shipping lines, the man who was known in the boardroom as the iceberg because you only saw 10% of his danger until it was too late. I took a deep breath. The air in the hallway tasted different now. It did not taste like fear. It tasted like gunpowder. I put the phone back in my pocket. I checked my watch. Jameson would be at the front door in exactly 3 minutes. I did not need 3 minutes. I needed 30 seconds to get back to the table and set the stage for the final act. I turned away from the kitchen door. My movements were fluid and silent. I walked back toward the dining room, but I did not walk like an old man anymore. I walked with the predatory grace of a lion returning to its kill. I pushed open the door to the dining room. Victoria was sitting there checking her reflection in a spoon. Lily was still staring at the table, her face stained with tears. They looked up as I entered. Victoria frowned. "Well, it is about time," she snapped. "We were about to send a search party. Did you wash your hands?" I looked at her. I looked right through the layers of makeup and the insecurity. "Yes," I said, my voice dropping an octave resonant and commanding. I washed them. I washed away everything. I walked to the table. I did not sit in the newspaper-covered chair. I stood at the head of the table, directly opposite the empty chair where Preston usually sat. I placed my hands on the table. "Where are the boys?" I asked. "They are coming," Victoria said, looking at me with a sudden flicker of unease. "Why are you standing there?" "Sit down, Harrison. You are making me nervous." "I am not sitting down, Victoria," I said. Just then the kitchen door swung open. Preston and Brandon walked in. They were grinning. They looked like two vultures who had just spotted a carcass. Harrison," Preston boomed, spreading his arms wide. "Feeling better, I hope? Ready to make the best decision of your life?" Brandon hurried to his seat, picking up the pen and the deed. "Here, Dad," Brandon said, shoving the papers toward me. "Just sign right here on the line. I marked it with an X for you." I looked at the X. It was the spot where they thought my life would end. I reached out and took the pen. It was a cheap ballpoint with a bank logo on it. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of it. Preston leaned in, his eyes hungry. Brandon held his breath. Lily looked away, unable to watch. I looked at Preston. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. "You know, Preston," I said softly, "you were right about one thing." "What is that, Harrison?" he asked. "I do not belong in this chair." And with a sudden violent motion I drove the pen down. Not onto the paper, but into the solid wood of the table, right through the deed. The plastic casing shattered. The metal tip buried itself half an inch deep into the veneer. The sound was like a gunshot. Victoria screamed. Preston jumped back, knocking his wineglass over. The fake red wine spilled across the table like blood. I looked at them, my eyes burning with a cold blue fire. "Because I am not the victim in this story," I said. The doorbell rang. Long, loud, final. I looked at the door. "I am the landlord, and your lease has just expired." I locked the bathroom door, and the heavy click of the deadbolt sounded like the loading of a chamber. For a moment, I just stood there, leaning against the cool wood of the door, breathing in the silence. The bathroom was opulent, filled with the scent of expensive potpourri, and decorated with gold-plated fixtures that were probably just polished brass. It was a cage of vanity, and I was the tiger pacing inside. My hand went to my pocket and retrieved the satellite phone. It was heavy in my palm, a solid block of military-grade encryption and titanium. This device was not designed for scrolling through social media or taking selfies. It was designed to move mountains. It was designed to command fleets of ships and redirect supply chains across continents. And tonight, it was going to be used to crush a mosquito. I pressed the speed dial for number 1. There was no ringing tone, just a sharp, secure digital handshake, followed immediately by a voice that was as familiar to me as my own. Charles here. Secure line active. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Charles was my chief financial officer. He had been with me for 30 years. He was a man who slept 4 hours a night and could read a balance sheet like a symphony conductor reads a score. He did not ask why I was calling at 8 in the evening on a Sunday. He knew that if I was calling on this line, the world was either ending or about to change for someone. Charles. I said, my voice low and devoid of the trembling weakness I had feigned at the dinner table. I need you to access the acquisition portal. I have a target. I am ready, sir. Charles replied instantly, the sound of a keyboard clacking furiously in the background. Give me the coordinates. I need you to look up a property in Greenwich, Connecticut. The address is 12 Oakwood Drive. The current tenants are Preston and Victoria Sterling. There was a brief pause, the silence filled only by the hum of the ventilation fan in the ceiling. I have it, sir. Charles said, his voice professional and detached. It is a residential estate. The property is currently held by a holding company called Greenwich Heights LLC, but the financials look terrible. The property is in pre-foreclosure. The tenants are 6 months behind on rent, and there are multiple liens against the title for unpaid contractor work. I looked at myself in the mirror. The old man in the plaid shirt stared back, but the eyes were sharp. I know, I said. Who holds the debt, Charles? One moment, Charles murmured. It looks like the primary mortgage is held by First National, but they have bundled it into a distressed assets at package. They are trying to offload it. The risk rating is D-. Honestly, sir, nobody would touch this with a 10-foot pole. It is a toxic asset. Buy it, I commanded. The typing stopped. Sir. Charles asked, his voice betraying a hint of surprise. You want to buy the debt. It is a guaranteed loss. The tenants have no liquidity. Their credit scores are sub 500. I did not ask for a risk assessment, Charles. I said, my voice hardening. I asked you to buy it. I want to own the mortgage. I want to own the lease. I want to own every single dollar of debt attached to the name Preston Sterling, and I want to own it in the next 10 minutes. There was a second of silence, then the typing resumed faster this time. Understood, sir. I am contacting the asset manager at First National now. Given the toxicity of the loan, they will likely be eager to sell. I can probably get it for 60 cents on the dollar. Do not negotiate, I snapped. Pay full price if you have to. Just get the title transfer done now. Offer them a cash settlement with immediate wire transfer. Make them an offer they cannot refuse because they are too busy counting the money. Yes, sir. Initiating transfer now. Authorization code Delta 9. Amount is $1.2 million covering the mortgage arrears and the buyout of the lease contract. I watched the second hand on my watch tick by. $1,200,000. To Preston Sterling, that amount was a fantasy, a dream he would chase by scamming his own family. To me, it was the cost of a lesson. It was the price of admission to the show I was about to direct. The typing on the other end stopped. We are in the system, sir, Charles said. The bank has accepted the offer. They are practically throwing the paperwork at us. The digital title is transferring to Bennett Holdings as we speak. Good, I said. Now one more thing. I sent you a photo of a car leasing agreement earlier. A Porsche Panamera. I see it, Charles said. Buy that note too. And the credit card debt. I want you to sweep the floor, Charles. If he owes money to a hot dog stand, I want to be the one selling the mustard. Done, Charles said. Sir, if I may ask, what is the strategy here? Is this a hostile takeover? I looked at the gold-plated faucet. I imagined Preston's face when the house of cards collapsed. No, Charles, I said. It is an eviction. Oh, I understand, Charles said. The transfer is complete. You are now the legal owner of the debt and the property. I will email the confirmation to your secure folder. Do you need legal representation on site? Yes, I said. Call Jameson. Tell him to meet me at the front door in 15 minutes. Tell him to bring the paperwork and 2 witnesses, and tell him to wear his best suit. Consider it done, Mr. Chairman. Anything else? No. That is all. Go to sleep, Charles. I ended the call. The silence rushed back into the room, but it felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a victim hiding in a bathroom. It was the silence of a predator waiting in the tall grass. I put the phone back into my pocket. I gripped the edge of the sink with both hands and leaned in close to the mirror. I studied my face. The wrinkles were still there. The gray hair was still there. The oil stains on my shirt were still there. But the fear was gone. I turned on the faucet. The water rushed out clear and cold. I splashed it onto my face, scrubbing away the salt of the tears I had shed for my daughter. I washed away the hesitation. I washed away the mercy. I grabbed a plush hand towel and dried my face. I adjusted the collar of my flannel shirt. I buttoned the top button that had come undone. I smoothed down my hair. I looked at the door. On the other side of that wood were 3 people who thought they were wolves. They were sitting around a table drinking fake wine, plotting how to consume a sheep. They had no idea that the sheep had just bought the forest. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen, fueling the fire that was burning in my gut. I was not Harrison the mechanic anymore. I was not the poor father-in-law. I was the chairman. I was the decision-maker. And I had just decided to foreclose on their arrogance. I reached for the door handle. It felt cool and solid under my hand. I unlocked the deadbolt. The sound was loud, a metallic clack that signaled the end of the intermission. The hunt begins. I whispered to the empty room. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. My boots did not drag on the floor this time. They struck the wood with a heavy rhythmic thud. I walked past the fake paintings. I walked past the unpaid electric bill sitting on the side table. I walked toward the dining room where the laughter of thieves was echoing off the walls. I was coming for them, and I was bringing the receipt. The walk back to the dining room felt like a funeral procession, but I was the only one who knew whose funeral it was. I kept my head low and my shoulders slumped, maintaining the posture of a defeated man who had just cried in a bathroom. When I pushed open the door, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The hushed whispers stopped. The clinking of glasses ceased. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me with a hunger that was almost primal. They were not looking at Harrison the person. They were looking at Harrison the signature. Brandon was the first to move. He practically leapt from his chair, his movements jerky and filled with nervous energy. He pulled out the chair with the newspapers on it, gesturing for me to sit down, as if he were welcoming a king rather than a victim. There he is, Brandon said, his voice cracking slightly. We were getting worried about you, Dad. Are you feeling better? I shuffled toward the chair and sat down slowly, letting my bones creak. I let out a long, shaky sigh, rubbing my temples as if fighting off a migraine. I am fine, I whispered. Just a little dizzy. It is a lot to take in. Preston leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. He had refilled his glass with the fake wine, and his face was flushed with the anticipation of the kill. Take your time, Harrison. Preston said, his voice oozing with false patience. We know it is a big decision, but big decisions are what define a man. You are doing the right thing. You are securing your daughter's future. That is what fathers do. They sacrifice. He slid the document across the table. It was the quitclaim deed transferring the title of my land to a shell company I assumed belonged to them. Beside it lay a black ballpoint pen. I looked at the paper. The text was dense, full of legal jargon meant to confuse the uneducated. But I saw the clauses. I saw the absolute surrender of rights. I saw the absence of any buyback agreement. Once I signed this, the land was gone forever. I reached out and picked up the pen. My hand trembled. I made sure of it. I let the pen hover over the paper, the tip shaking just enough to make them hold their breath. Brandon was staring at the pen tip like an addict staring at a needle. Lily was looking at her lap, her hands gripping her napkin so tight her knuckles were white. She could not watch. At least she had that much shame left. I lowered the pen until it touched the paper, leaving a tiny black dot of ink on the signature line. Then I stopped. I lifted the pen again. The tension in the room was palpable. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I could hear the shallow breathing of my son-in-law. I have a question, I stammered. Preston let out a breath through his nose, a sound of barely suppressed irritation. What is it, Harrison? He asked. The terms are exactly what we discussed. I know, I said, keeping my eyes on the table. But this is not about the terms. It is about us. I slowly raised my head and looked at each of them in turn. I looked at Brandon, who was checking his watch. I looked at Lily, who refused to meet my gaze. Finally, I locked eyes with Victoria, who was looking at me with the cold impatience of a woman waiting for a slow waiter to bring the check. I need to know, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. If I do this, if I give you everything I have, will I still be welcome here? Do you really consider me family? The question hung in the air. It was the final test. I was giving them one last chance to show a shred of humanity, one last chance to prove that they were not completely hollow inside. For a second, nobody spoke. Brandon looked at his mother. Lily looked at her husband. Then Victoria smiled. It was a wide, bright smile that did not reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator who realizes the prey just needs a little more bait. Oh, Harrison, she cooed, leaning back and spreading her hands wide. How can you even ask that? Of course you are family. You are the grandfather of our future grandchildren. You are the patriarch of the Bennett side. She reached out and patted my hand, the one resting on the dirty newspaper. Her skin was cold. This house is your house. She continued, her voice dripping with syrup. When we make millions from this project, you will have a room in the West Wing. We will take care of you. We will travel together. We are all in this together, Harrison. One big, happy family. I looked at her. I saw the lie sitting on her tongue like a venomous toad. She did not want me in the West Wing. She wanted me in a state facility. She did not want to travel with me. She wanted to erase me. I looked at Brandon. Is that true, son? I asked. Brandon nodded vigorously. 100%, Dad, he said. We are a team. You help us now and we help you forever. That is a promise. I looked at Lily. Lily, I asked softly, is this what you want? Lily finally looked up. Her eyes were red. She looked at her husband, who was glaring at her, warning her with his eyes. She looked at her mother-in-law, who was smiling that terrifying smile. Then she looked at me. Yes, Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible. It is what we need. Just sign it, please, so we can all be happy. There it was, the unanimous verdict. They were all willing to lie to my face to get what they wanted. They were willing to sell their souls for a signature. I nodded slowly, as if their lies had comforted me. Okay, I said. Okay. I believe you. I adjusted my grip on the pen. I took a deep breath. I will do it, I said. For the family. Preston leaned in closer, his eyes practically bulging. That is it, Harrison, he encouraged. Just right on the line. Press hard. It is a carbon copy. I lowered the pen again. I let the tip touch the paper. I began to make the first mark of my name, the loop of the letter H. The room was silent. They were watching the ink flow. They were watching their financial salvation manifest on the page. Ding dong. The sound of the doorbell shattered the silence like a hammer hitting a pane of glass. It was loud, echoing through the cavernous house. I stopped writing. I lifted the pen. Brandon jumped. Preston slammed his hand on the table. Damn it! Preston cursed. Who is that? I told the staff not to disturb us. Victoria looked at the door, alarmed. Is it the VIP? She asked. Is Mr. Jameson here already? Preston checked his watch. He is not supposed to be here for another 20 minutes. And he would not ring the bell, he would call. Brandon stood up. I will get it, he said. I will tell them to go away. Dad, just keep signing. Do not stop. I sat back in my chair. I lowered the pen to the table, but I did not let go of it. I looked at the front door, which was visible through the archway of the dining room. Wait, I said, my voice suddenly clear. No tremor, no stutter. They all looked at me, surprised by the change in my tone. I think you should answer it, I said. Why? Brandon asked, impatient. It is probably just a delivery. I looked him dead in the eye. The mask of the feeble old man was slipping, and underneath the steel of the CEO was beginning to show. Because, I said calmly, I have a feeling it is not a delivery. I think it is the end of the show. Preston narrowed his eyes. What are you talking about, Harrison? What show? I gestured to the door with the pen. The one where you pretend to be rich, and I pretend to be stupid. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time. More insistent. Brandon looked confused. He looked from me to his father. Go answer it, Brandon, I commanded. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of authority that made 2,000 employees jump when I spoke. Brandon hesitated. The authority in my voice confused him. It scared him. He walked slowly to the door. He reached for the handle. I turned my chair slightly so I could see the entrance. I saw Brandon open the heavy wooden door. Standing there, framed by the porch lights, was Jameson. He was wearing a 3-piece charcoal suit that cost more than Brandon's car. Flanking him were 2 men carrying briefcases, and behind them, parked in the driveway where my old truck had been, was a black town car with a driver waiting. Jameson did not look at Brandon. He looked past him directly at me. Brandon stammered. Can I help you? Jameson stepped into the foyer, pushing past Brandon as if he were a doorman. I am here to see the owner of the property, Jameson said, his voice projecting into the dining room. Preston stood up, puffing out his chest, trying to regain control. I am the owner, he announced, walking toward the foyer. I am Preston Sterling, and you are interrupting a private family dinner. Jameson stopped. He looked at Preston with a look of mild amusement. No, Jameson said. You are the tenant, and according to the paperwork I just processed, you are the former tenant. Preston froze. What? He asked. Jameson turned his gaze to me. He walked right past Preston, ignoring him completely. He walked into the dining room and stopped in front of my table. He placed a leather folder on the table right on top of the deed I was supposed to sign. "Good evening, Mr. Chairman," Jameson said, bowing his head slightly. "The transaction is complete. You now own the debt, you own the lease, and you own the car in the driveway." The room went dead silent. I stood up. I did not struggle. I did not use the table for support. I stood up straight, my full 6-foot frame casting a shadow over the table. I picked up the cheap pen Brandon had given me. I looked at it for a moment, then I snapped it in half and dropped the pieces onto the plate of untouched food. "Thank you, Jameson," I said. I looked at Preston, who was standing in the hallway, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I looked at Victoria, whose face had gone pale beneath the makeup. "I think it is time we had a real conversation," I said, "about who exactly is sitting in the poor seat." Preston moved toward the front door with a speed that defied his age and his weight. He smoothed down the lapels of his suit jacket and checked his reflection in the hallway mirror for one split second. He was terrified, but he was also desperate, and desperation wears a very convincing mask. He believed that whoever was on the other side of that door was the answer to his prayers. He believed it was a savior who would inject cash into his fantasy life. He grabbed the brass handle and swung the heavy door open. Standing under the porch light was Jameson. I had known Jameson for 20 years. He was a man cut from granite. He stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, and he wore his 3-piece charcoal suit like a suit of armor. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his eyes were like 2 chips of ice. Flanking him were 2 younger men, lawyers. They carried thick black leather briefcases and wore expressions that suggested they billed by the second. Preston did not see the lawyers. He only saw Jameson. He saw the expensive fabric. He saw the power. "Mr. Jameson." Preston gushed, his voice cracking with excitement. "What an incredible surprise. I am Preston Sterling. We spoke briefly on the phone regarding the logistics contract. Please come in. My home is your home." Preston extended his hand. He stepped back to allow them entry, bowing slightly, in a gesture of subservience that was painful to watch. He was practically wagging his tail. Jameson stepped over the threshold. He did not look at Preston. He did not look at the extended hand. He walked past Preston as if the man were a coat rack. The 2 lawyers followed Jameson, silently stepping around Preston, who was left standing there, with his hand hanging in the air, shaking a ghost. Preston blinked, confused. He turned and scurried after them, his expensive shoes slipping slightly on the polished floor. "Mr. Jameson," Preston stammered, trying to keep up. "If you would just follow me to the drawing room, I can have my wife bring us some refreshments. We were just finishing a family dinner, but business always comes first, right?" Jameson did not answer. He did not even slow down. He walked with a military cadence, his heels clicking sharply on the wood floor. He marched straight down the hallway past the fake oil paintings and the unpaid electric bill. I sat at the dining room table and watched them approach. Brandon had stood up nervously, wiping his hands on his pants. Victoria was patting her hair, trying to look presentable for the VIP. Jameson stopped at the archway of the dining room. He stood there for a moment, surveying the scene. His eyes took in the cheap projector screen. He looked at the bottle of fake wine. He looked at the broken pen on my plate. And then he looked at the newspapers covering my chair. A muscle in Jameson's jaw tightened. It was the only sign of emotion he showed. Preston came breathless up behind him. "Right this way, sir," Preston said, gesturing to the empty seat at the head of the table. "Please sit. Can I get you a glass of wine? It is a 1982 Rothschild." Jameson ignored him completely. He stepped into the room. He walked past the empty seat. He walked past Victoria, who had frozen with a fake smile plastered on her face. He walked past Brandon, who was looking at him with a mixture of awe and fear. He walked straight toward me. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the light bulbs. Everyone was watching. They were confused. Why was the billionaire walking toward the mechanic? Why was the VIP approaching the man sitting on the garbage? Jameson stopped 3 feet in front of me. He placed his feet together. He straightened his back. And then he bowed. It was not a nod. It was not a casual greeting. It was a deep, formal 90-degree bow, the kind of bow reserved for royalty or heads of state. He held the position for 2 full seconds, a display of absolute deference and respect that sucked the air out of the room. The lawyers behind him did the same, bowing in unison, like a well-rehearsed drill. Preston's mouth fell open. Victoria let out a small, strangled gasp. Jameson straightened up. He looked me in the eye. His face was serious, professional, and utterly loyal. "Good evening, Mr. Chairman," Jameson said, his voice clear and resonant. He turned slightly and snapped his fingers. One of the lawyers stepped forward and opened a briefcase. He pulled out a thick leather folder and handed it to Jameson with 2 hands. Jameson took the folder and placed it gently on the table in front of me. He placed it right over the dirty newspaper. "I apologize for the interruption, sir," Jameson continued. "But you requested an immediate acquisition. We had to wake up the bank president to bypass the automated systems." He opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents stamped with the official seal of the state of Connecticut. "The transfer of title is complete," Jameson said, pointing to the top document. "The mortgage for 12 Oakwood Drive has been purchased by Bennett Holdings. We also acquired the lease agreement from the previous landlord. As of 10 minutes ago, you are the sole legal owner of this property." He turned the page. "We also executed the purchase of the personal debts, the vehicle financing for the Porsche, the credit card liabilities, and the outstanding judgments from the Nevada lawsuit. We own it all, sir." Jameson closed the folder. He clasped his hands behind his back and stood at attention. The total transaction cost was $1.6 million. The funds have been wired. The assets are secured. He paused, looking at the stunned faces around the table before turning back to me. "I have the eviction team on standby outside the gate, and the local sheriff is parking his vehicle now. The question is, sir, how do you wish to proceed? Do you want to seize the assets immediately, or should we give the tenants until morning to vacate the premises?" I sat there looking at the folder. I looked at the words, "Deed of Trust." I looked at my name, Harrison Bennett, typed in bold letters at the top. I looked up at Jameson. "Thank you, Jameson," I said quietly. "You made good time." "We aim to serve Mr. Chairman," Jameson replied. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and terrifying. It was the silence of a reality shattering into a million pieces. Preston was leaning against the doorframe, his face a mask of gray shock. He looked like he was having a stroke. His eyes darted from Jameson to me and back again, trying to process the impossibility of what he had just heard. Victoria was gripping the edge of the table so hard her fingernails were digging into the wood. Her mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. And Brandon. My son-in-law was standing by his chair. He was holding his glass of fake wine halfway to his mouth. He had been about to take a sip when Jameson bowed. Now he was frozen like a statue. He looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time in years. He looked at the old flannel shirt. He looked at the calloused hands. And then he looked at the deference the powerful CEO was showing me. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sick and pale. His eyes went wide with a dawning horror. He realized who I was. He realized who he had insulted. He realized who he had tried to scam. His fingers went numb. The crystal glass slipped from his hand. It fell in slow motion. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, violent crash. The sound was explosive in the quiet room. Red wine splattered across the floor, looking like blood spreading out from a wound. Shards of glass skittered across the floor, stopping at the tip of Jameson's polished shoe. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the wine running off the tablecloth. And then I stood up. The word chairman hung in the air like a guillotine blade that had just dropped, but had not yet hit the neck. Preston Sterling was blinking rapidly, his brain trying to reconcile two completely incompatible realities. He looked at the man in the $3,000 suit, bowing to the man in the oil-stained flannel shirt. He looked at the leather folder on the table, and then he looked at me. Chairman. Preston choked out the word. He sounded like he was strangling on his own saliva. You. This old man. You are the chairman of Bennett Logistics. He laughed. It was a short, hysterical sound that bordered on madness. This is a joke, right? He looked at Jameson, desperate for confirmation. This is some kind of prank. Did Brandon hire you? Is this an actor? Jameson did not even blink. He remained standing at attention, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall, his loyalty absolute. I decided it was time to answer for myself. I looked down at the chair I had been sitting in. I looked at the layers of newspaper Victoria had ordered the maid to lay out, so my poverty would not infect her fake furniture. I saw a coupon for detergent under my thigh. I saw the sports scores under my elbow. It was a shrine to their arrogance and my humiliation. I did not just stand up. I rose. I pushed the chair back with enough force that it skidded across the hardwood floor with a screech that sounded like a dying animal. It hit the wall with a loud thud. I looked down at the newspaper that had fluttered to the floor near my boots. I drew my leg back and kicked it. I kicked the pile of paper with the full force of a man who had hauled freight for 40 years. The papers scattered, flying into the air like confetti at a funeral. That is enough, I said. My voice was no longer the raspy whisper of a retired grandfather. It was the deep, commanding baritone that had silenced union strikes and negotiated billion-dollar mergers. I reached out and grabbed the thick leather folder Jameson had placed on the table. I did not hand it to Preston. I threw it. It spun across the polished surface of the table, knocking over the salt shaker and sliding to a stop right in front of Preston's chest. Read it, Preston, I commanded. Read the name on the deed. It does not say Green Horizon, it says Harrison Bennett. Preston's hands shook so badly he could barely open the cover. He stared at the document, his eyes scanning the lines, his face draining of color, until he looked like a corpse standing upright. You bought the debt, he whispered. 1.6 million. You just wrote a check. I walked around the table slowly. Every step I took felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my dignity. I did not just write a check, Preston. I said, closing the distance between us. I bought your life. I own the roof over your head. I own the car in your driveway. I own the credit card debt you used to buy that suit you are wearing. I stopped inches from his face. I could smell the fear on him. It smelled sour. And do you know what landlords do when tenants do not pay their rent for 6 months? Preston shook his head, unable to speak. They evict them, I said, cold and hard. I checked my watch. It was a battered Timex that I wore for work, but right now it felt like the timer on a bomb. It is currently 8:45, I said. You have exactly 30 minutes. Preston blinked. 30 minutes for what? He asked, weak. To get out, I said. You have 30 minutes to pack whatever personal belongings you can carry. No furniture, no artwork, no electronics. Those are assets of the estate now, and I am seizing them to recoup a fraction of what you owe me. You take your clothes and you get out. But where will we go? Preston stammered. It is night. We have nowhere to go. I tilted my head slightly, mimicking the look of fake sympathy Victoria had given me earlier. I believe there is a state-run shelter in Bridgeport, I said. Lily looked it up. She said it is very safe. They have beds and meals. I am sure you will fit right in. Preston's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the table to hold himself up. I turned my back on him. He was broken. He was no longer a threat. He was just a tragic figure in a suit he could no longer afford. I turned my eyes to Brandon. My son-in-law was still standing by his chair, frozen in a state of shock. But as I looked at him, I saw the shock turning into terror. He knew that losing the house was the least of his problems. And you, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. The entrepreneur, the visionary. Brandon swallowed hard. Dad, he squeaked. Dad, please. We can work this out. I can explain. The project... I held up a hand, silencing him instantly. Do not say another word about Green Horizon, I said, because if you say that name one more time, I might just lose my temper, and I really do not want to do that in front of my staff. I walked toward him. He shrank back, cowering against the china cabinet. I had my team run a forensic audit on your little startup, Brandon, I said. It took them about 10 minutes to find the cracks. You do not have investors in Silicon Valley. You have a list of retired teachers and nurses that you defrauded out of their pension funds. Brandon's eyes went wide. No, he whispered. That is not true. It is a Ponzi scheme. I roared, cutting him off. You are paying early investors with money from new victims. You are washing the money through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Did you really think you could pitch that garbage to me and I would not check the books? I pointed to the front door. I did not just call my banker Brandon. I called a friend of mine. He is the district attorney for this county. Brandon let out a whimper. He looked at the front door as if expecting it to burst open. He was very interested in your slide deck, I continued, especially the part where you promised guaranteed returns on unregistered securities. That is a federal crime, Brandon. Wire fraud, securities fraud, elder abuse. I leaned in close so only he could hear the next part. There are 2 cars waiting outside the gate right now. One is a town car for me. The other is a cruiser from the Economic Crimes Unit. They are waiting for you to step off private property so they can arrest you without a warrant. Brandon's legs gave out. He slid down the front of the china cabinet, landing in a heap on the floor. He put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was not the crying of a man who was sorry. It was the crying of a man who got caught. I stood over him, looking down with zero pity. You called me a loser, Brandon. You said I had a poverty mindset. Well, here is a lesson in wealth management. True wealth is freedom, and you are about to lose yours for 5 to 10 years. I turned to face the room. The destruction was almost complete. Victoria was standing by the window. She had been silent this whole time, watching her world disintegrate. She looked at her husband, who was hyperventilating at the table. She looked at her son, who was crying on the floor. And she looked at me, the man she had treated like a contagion. Harrison, she whispered, her voice trembling. You cannot do this. We are family. You said it yourself. We are family. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, but underneath the fear, I still saw the calculation. She was already trying to figure out how to manipulate her way out of this. I am not your family, Victoria, I said. I am your creditor. And then it happened. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was the realization that she would never shop at Bergdorf Goodman again. Or maybe it was just one final desperate attempt to gain sympathy. Victoria's eyes rolled back in her head. She let out a soft moan. Her hand fluttered to her chest, and she collapsed. She hit the floor with a thud that shook the wine glasses on the table. Mom! Lily screamed. Lily had been standing in the corner paralyzed by the scene. Now she rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside her mother-in-law. "Mom, wake up! Dad, help her! Call an ambulance!" I looked at Victoria lying on the rug. I saw her eyelids flutter slightly. I saw the way she had braced herself with her arm as she fell so she wouldn't hit her head too hard. She was faking it. Even at the end of the world, she was still performing. I looked at Jameson. "Call the paramedics," I said calmly. "Tell them we have a woman who has fainted from acute insolvency." Jameson pulled out his phone. I looked at the clock. 28 minutes left. I announced to the room. I walked over to the window and looked out at the driveway. I could see the flashing lights of the police car reflecting off the hood of my old Ford truck. The chaos behind me was loud. Lily was crying. Brandon was sobbing. Preston was muttering to himself. But I felt a strange sense of peace. The storm had broken. The truth was out. And the silence that would follow this noise would be the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The sirens of the police cruiser cast a rhythmic red and blue light across the dining room walls, illuminating the wreckage of a family that had built its foundation on greed. The officers were already at the front door, their radios crackling with dispatch codes. Brandon was still on the floor, weeping into his hands, a pathetic figure who had lost his bravado the moment he lost his perceived power. Preston was slumped in a chair, his face buried in his hands, muttering about lawyers and misunderstandings. Victoria was being attended to by the paramedics who were checking her vitals with skepticism written all over their faces. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at Lily. My daughter had finally stopped crying. She was staring at her husband with a look of pure horror, as if seeing a monster for the first time. The illusion of her perfect life had shattered, and she was standing amidst the shards, bleeding and confused. When she saw me turn to leave, she moved. She scrambled across the floor, not caring about her dress or her dignity. She threw herself at my feet, wrapping her arms around my legs in a desperate embrace. "Dad," she sobbed, her voice raw and broken. "Dad, please wait. I did not know. You have to believe me. I did not know about the Ponzi scheme. I did not know they were broke. I was just trying to be a good wife." I looked down at her. Part of me, the father who had held her when she scraped her knee, wanted to bend down and comfort her. Wanted to tell her that everything would be all right, and that I would fix it. But the other part of me, the part that had just been humiliated and exploited, knew that comfort was not what she needed. She needed the truth. I reached down and gently but firmly unclasped her hands from my legs. I took a step back, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm between us. "You did not know about the fraud, Lily," I said, my voice low and steady. "I believe that. But you knew about the cruelty. You knew they treated me like garbage and you stood by and watched. You knew they wanted to put me in a state home and you agreed to it." "I did not have a choice," she pleaded. "Brandon said it was the only way. He said you were dead weight." I interrupted her. Lily froze. "What?" she whispered. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and pressed play. The voice of her husband filled the silent room loud and clear. "She is kind of dead weight anyway. She is stupid too. She will wait here like a loyal dog while the house of cards falls on top of her." I watched the words hit her. It was brutal. It was like watching someone be physically struck. Her face crumpled. She looked back at Brandon, who was now being handcuffed by the officers. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading, but it was too late. The mask was gone. "You chose him, Lily," I said softly, turning off the recording. "You chose a man who called you stupid over a father who would have died for you. Tying your life to a man is not a crime, but blinding yourself to his character is a choice. You let your desire for this lifestyle blind you to the reality of who these people are." Lily wept, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. Help me. Please help me. I have nowhere to go. They are taking the house. They are taking everything. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a small white card. It was not a check. It was a business card. I handed it to her. This is the number for my personal attorney, I said. He is the best divorce lawyer in the state. I have already instructed him to take your case. He will ensure that you are not held liable for Brandon's debts. He will help you clear your name. Lily took the card, looking at it through her tears. And money? She asked hesitantly. What will I do for money? I looked at her. I saw the fear of poverty in her eyes, the same fear that had made her complicit in their scheme. I will pay your legal fees, I said, and I will pay for a small apartment for 3 months. After that, you are on your own. On my own. She repeated, shock coloring her voice. But Dad, you are rich. You own everything. Yes, I said. I do. And because I love you, I am not going to let you inherit a dime of it until you learn how to earn it. I leaned in closer, my voice hardening. I am setting up a trust, Lily, but it is conditional. The Bennett Home for Children will receive the majority of my estate. If you want to be a part of my life again, if you want any support from me, you will get a job. You will volunteer. You will show me that you can build a life based on values, not valuables. Until then, you are on your own. I turned away from her. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, leaving my child in the ruins of her own making. But I knew that if I saved her now, I would lose her forever. She needed to find her own strength, not borrow mine. I walked toward the front door. Jameson was waiting for me, holding it open. Good night, Mr. Chairman, Jameson said. The car is ready. I walked out into the cool night air. The flashing lights of the police cars were blinding, but beyond them, the sky was clear and full of stars. My old Ford F150 was parked in the driveway, a silent sentinel amidst the chaos. I walked past the town car. I walked past the driver who rushed to open the door for me. Sir, the driver asked, confused. Do you not want to take the limousine? I shook my head. No, I said. I think I will drive myself tonight. I walked over to my truck. I climbed into the cab. The seat was worn. The steering wheel was cracked. The engine roared to life with that familiar cough and sputter. It was not a luxury vehicle. It was a working man vehicle. And as I shifted into gear and pulled away, leaving the mansion and the screaming sirens behind me, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was going home, back to my cabin, back to the truth. I had lost a family that never really existed, but I had found myself again. And that was a profit worth making. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who value you the least. We spend so much time trying to buy their respect, trying to fit into their boxes, that we forget our own worth. Real family is not defined by blood or marriage certificates. It is defined by loyalty, respect, and how they treat you when you have nothing to offer them but yourself. Do not be afraid to walk away from a table where respect is no longer being served. Your dignity is more valuable than any inheritance. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about standing up for yourself, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and share these important lessons. And let me know in the comments below, have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to save your own peace? I read every comment, and I would love to hear your story. See you in the next video.